This is a 10-year shift from shareholder capitalism, which is what we have here in the West at the moment, to stakeholder capitalism, which is a new political system.
Coming up on British Thought Leaders, Richard Jeffs talks about his documentary on stakeholder communism. Richard says we're being transitioned into a new political system we never asked for.
There's no question this is undemocratic. We know it's undemocratic because no one's voted for it. We know it's happening discreetly because most people are unaware of it. And it's happening deceptively, as we've just explained.
And that the rise of technology has opened the door to new forms of tyranny.
It provides them the power to enact a totalitarian regime that is unprecedented in human history. And we either comply and survive and eat food and have a house, or we reject it.
Welcome to British Thought Leaders, I'm Lee Hall. Today I'm sitting down with investigative filmmaker Richard Jeffs. Richard, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Can you give us a brief introduction?
Yeah, so I worked in television for ITV, which is one of the major TV broadcasters in the UK, as a director and then a producer. And I was working on current affairs such as Panorama and Watchdog, which was our major documentary shows in the UK for current affairs, the flagship shows for the BBC. And then I left the industry and became a tech entrepreneur, and I've created a platform called Yilo that's designed for freelancers and the future of work. And that's really what got my interest in essentially the future economy and the future of work.
So you've made a documentary called Stakeholder Communism. Can you start by telling us what stakeholder communism is and why it's worth making a documentary about?
Sure. So stakeholder communism is about our new economic system called stakeholder capitalism.
Right.
It was enacted in 2020 by the World Economic Forum and its members. Their members are the heads of all G20 countries, such as the US and UK, Russia and China, as well as most Fortune 500 companies and the heads of NGOs such as the World Health Organization, the UN. And it's a economic system that will be fully enacted by 2030. So this is a 10-year shift from shareholder capitalism, which is what we have here in the West at the moment, to stakeholder capitalism, which is a new political system.
So you've also got state capitalism, which is kind of the China kind of system, right?
That's right. So in the East, and this is described by Klaus Schwab, who was the founder of the World Economic Forum, in his book called Stakeholder Capitalism. He describes stakeholder capitalism as coming from or being derived from two existing systems: state capitalism, which they have in the East, which is essentially communism, which they have in China, which essentially provides authority or control to the state.
Right.
And then we have shareholder capitalism in the West, which enables companies to have the freedom to trade in the interest of generating profit for their shareholders. So Klaus Schwab explains that from these two systems, we need a new global system called stakeholder capitalism.
And so I wanted to kind of look at some of the different areas of this. So I mean, for a start, net zero, we hear so much about it now. How does that fit into all of this?
Sure. So the two key components of stakeholder capitalism, people and planet. People refers to the inclusive policies that are being enacted around the world. That's the diversity, equity and inclusion policies and that the companies are adopting. And then the sustainable part, it means the planet. Sustainable, inclusive and sustainable people and planet, they both mean the same thing. Sustainable means environmental or climate change.
Yeah.
So part of his clever plan is to propagate the idea that climate change is posing an existential threat, and that unless we give up our use of petrol and diesel, anything that emits carbon, so stop eating meat, anything that comes from livestock, then the world is going to end. So it's causing a state of fear among a lot of people, and that's why we're seeing a lot of people who are going out gluing their hands to the street and chucking soup over paintings because they're fearful that the world's essentially going to end. So we become so fearful of the planet becoming or climate change becoming an existential threat that we actually want this transition to a new system.
So you mentioned inclusive and sustainable. We talked about the sustainable green stuff, but what about the inclusive side?
So we also see that playing out in society at the moment as well. So, and that's we see this played out throughout history, particularly in the Cultural Revolution in China, where Mao indoctrinated the working class to believe they were oppressed and encouraged them to rise up and overturn capitalism in favour of communism. So the same playbook is being used today, but instead of using class, they're focusing on gender and race. And the policies that we see relating to that is critical race theory relating to race and gender identity. And these ideas are being propagated, particularly at universities, at the younger generations. I think that was mainly because Mao believed that the younger generations were more impressionable, and that's why they're targeting a lot of the education or the students to adopt these new ideas, which, when you think about it, when you break it down, so the gender identity policies is essentially saying that there is no gender concept anymore. The idea that there is male and female does not exist. People can be born into the wrong body, and they're making young people believe that you are whatever gender you believe you are. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they are the oppressor. So they are encouraging trans women to use women's bathrooms and take part in women's sports, and saying you deserve to be taking part in these women's sports because you are female, and you should be using the females' changing rooms because you are a woman. And anyone who's opposing that, that's evidence that you're oppressed. So they're creating division and playing us off against each other.
Communism didn't make it anywhere more inclusive. It kind of, the wealth went to certain people, and a lot of people got slaughtered, but it seems we don't really learn the lessons from history.
I don't think a lot of people are taught those lessons anymore either. So I don't think people are actually aware that inclusive ideas that are being played out today by making us believe that a subset of our community are oppressed is a communist, it's a Marxist idea. That's where Mao got his idea from.
You're not the first guest who has compared what's happening recently with the Cultural Revolution. Having studied the Cultural Revolution, I find it quite terrifying, to be honest. It's
very scary to see how the Chinese actually want communism. It has to work that way, because how does a small number of government leaders in China force the entire Chinese population to adopt communism and their restrictions? They have to indoctrinate them to want it. So there is a piece in the film where I show how people in China actually want their social credit score. They want the restrictions because they're led to believe it makes society better and safer.
Can you talk to us a bit about the social credit score, just for any viewers who aren't sure how it works?
Yeah, so in China, citizens are scored pretty much across all aspects of their life. Whether, they're scored whether they buy alcohol, smoke cigarettes, whether they jaywalk. And these are the small things, but you're completely blacklisted if you report government corruption. So anyone who's blacklisted, they can't buy a train ticket, they can't get a mortgage or send their children to a private school. They're pretty much shut out of society. So it's a way of forcing people to comply, the social credit score. We also see another element of that playing out in the economy with Klaus Schwab's Stakeholder Capitalism ESG credit score.
So Elon Musk said ESG is a communism rebranded. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, so ESG is the credit score that forces companies to adopt stakeholder capitalism. And ESG stands for environmental, social governance. Environmental being the climate change policies, and that's the net zero policies that we explained, which means that we need to ban anything that emits carbon by 2030. The idea of that, if I didn't get into it before, is to prevent us from being able to travel. Essentially, it's travel restrictions, because net zero stops us from owning private vehicles, petrol or diesel vehicles, travelling by plane, etc. And then, of course, there's the notorious 15-minute cities that you might have heard about, which essentially has everything we need within a 15-minute radius. And then we'd have to buy carbon credits in order to leave. So the environmental part of the ESG is getting companies to comply to Klaus Schwab's net zero policies. They're not sold as severe as net zero at the moment, but companies have to report. So it's now being made mandatory. It has been made mandatory in the UK for large companies to report environmental metrics as part of the stakeholder capitalism move. And the S is the social part, which is the inclusive part of the credit score, which means that more companies have to adopt inclusive diversity, equity and inclusion policies, which is essentially saying we recognise that black and trans people are oppressed, and we now need to prioritise opportunities to these people.
So it seems there's so many different issues here, and this plan kind of basically ties them all together.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who are talking about all of these problems, and they're all very much focused within those specific silos. And what I encourage is people to take a step back and say, this is all because of our transition to stakeholder capitalism. As we get involved in these smaller arguments, that's essentially what the stakeholders want us to do. Right. They want us to be divided like that. So if we adopt a slightly different narrative that this is all because of our transition to another political system called stakeholder capitalism, I think that's much more of a powerful message. And it's easy for people who are not aware of what's happening to wrap their heads around this, because there's no question this is undemocratic. We know it's undemocratic because no one's voted for it. We know it's happening discreetly because most people are unaware of it, and it's happening deceptively, as we've just explained.
How do you think the pandemic and the lockdowns, etc., gave us a bit of a preview of this stuff?
Well, the pandemic was launched right at the beginning of 2020, and the name of Klaus Schwab's 10-year shift to full stakeholder capitalism is called the Great Reset. And the Great Reset was launched with the pandemic. And the point of the pandemic, beyond seeing how compliant we will become and trying to shift us to this authoritarian society with vaccine passports and so forth, is to accelerate our transition to the fourth industrial revolution. Right. And the fourth industrial revolution is an economy where artificial intelligence takes our jobs. So when AI takes our jobs, our wealth will shift to his stakeholders who own the machines. These are the heads of all the Fortune 500 companies. And we see that wealth transfer happening exponentially at the moment. It was started when we were forced to lock down, when businesses were closed, when businesses were forced to close their doors. This began the accelerated transition to the fourth industrial revolution. In the future, when AI takes our jobs, and they predict that 50% of our jobs will be lost to AI by 2025. That's what their prediction was in 2020. That's now been postponed to 42% by 2027. So it's been delayed. That when AI takes our jobs, we're going to become dependent on them, the people who have the money, who own the machines, because it's they who are going to have a lot of the wealth. And we're going to become dependent on them for our basic living needs, for, a roof over our head, for our food. and our debt is growing quite heavily at the moment. So there is a potential for a financial crash to happen, where it will then further accelerate our transition to the fourth industrial revolution. So if there is a severe financial crash, and the World Economic Forum have projected that the next financial crash would be equal to that of the Great Depression,
Right.
then that would cause a lot of job losses and a lot of companies to go under, especially small and medium-sized businesses. And those that will survive will essentially be the tech companies, who will be the strongest or the most competitive in the fourth industrial revolution, because they don't rely on the workforce; their overheads are lower.
You talked a bit about this shift in wealth. It gets talked a bit about here and there, but people don't seem quite that alarmed about it.
I think a lot of people are feeling it at the moment, but they're not aware that this is something that's going to continue to escalate and get worse as we transition to the fourth industrial revolution, and the World Economic Forum enact their Great Reset plan to destabilize our economies. So you think of the transport industry alone. It's one of the largest employers of people, and you see autonomous vehicles already on the streets in California. So when AI takes those taxi driver jobs and train jobs and anything else that relies on people to drive vehicles of any sort, that's a huge number of the population already out of work. And you ask a 50-year-old truck driver to go and retrain to become a software developer, it's just not going to happen. So it's going to result in a significant number of job losses.
Did the lockdowns, again, kind of speed up this wealth transfer? Some of the figures of the billionaires before and after the lockdown, their wealth is just stunning.
When we are locked down, we are spending a lot more on Amazon and so forth. A lot of companies went under, a lot of people weren't working. So that's what accelerated our transition to this job economy. So, but it's all being done deceptively. It's happening, it's gaining more and more momentum. People are totally unaware, thinking that everything could return back to normal at some point, but it's not. It's getting worse and worse and worse for everyone.
So jobs is kind of key in all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, it's every industry is going to be affected. The finance industry alone, I don't know how many people that employs, but it's another significant economy. So software can manage data a lot better than humans can already, no doubt, with some simple software. So as AI advances, it will just take more and more jobs. The finance industry will be completely transformed very quickly as well. So there's going to be a lot of people who are affected by this. And then how do they, if without an income, how do they pay their mortgage? How do they pay for their food, etc.? So their plan is to provide us with a universal basic income.
Right.
And that's going to be paid for from a robot tax. So the tech companies who own the machines will receive a tax, and that will pay for a universal basic income. Now the reason for that is because when AI takes our jobs and more people become unemployed, currently we have benefit or welfare systems that provides a safety net to anyone who's unemployed. But as more people become unemployed, there's going to be less tax paid, and therefore less money is going to be paid into the benefit and welfare pots, because those pots are subsidised by the tax that's paid by people who work. So with less people working and more people becoming unemployed, those benefit and welfare pots are going to be unfit for purpose. There's not going to be enough money in there. In fact, the same for the government. The government's not going to be able to receive the same kind of funding as it does today. Therefore, the responsibility shifts away from the taxpayer to the people who have all the money, and they are the heads of all the Fortune 500 companies who own the machines. It will become their responsibility to provide everyone with a universal basic income, which will then provide our basic living needs. And when you're dependent on them for your food and your house, and if you don't want to comply, well, you don't get any money.
So we're back to the social credit system, but a version for the West, basically.
Yes, but also there's another caveat that's going to cause an issue, is that those companies that have all the wealth, when they provide us with our universal basic income, they can't just give their money away because they'll start to lose their wealth, particularly if we go and spend it with their competitors. So they need to ensure they get that money back. So this is perfect timing for them because they've been wanting to roll out a digital currency for some time, and this provides them an opportunity to roll out what they've already started to build and talk quite openly about, is their central bank digital currency, a CBDC.
Right.
And a CBDC is programmable, which is what they've announced, which means that they can program how we spend our money. So if they give us the universal basic income in the currency of a CBDC, they can program it so we can only spend it back with them. So we can't spend it on their competitors, which means that we need to get maybe our house from BlackRock, who are incidentally buying up all the family-sized homes at the moment. Yeah. Climate change or cows are killing the planet, so they need to be banned and outlawed. And all farming activity, sustainable farming activity by us that provides us security, that all needs to be banned because that's killing the planet. It's going to kill all of us. So all of these policies are all part of this plan to ensure that they control the housing supply chain and the food supply chain. And we'll be presented with some very, a small amount of options with regards to what food we can eat and where we can travel.
Which sounds exactly like the communist societies. You go to the shop, there's one thing on the shelf.
It's a lot worse. It provides them the power to enact a totalitarian regime that is unprecedented in human history. And we either comply and survive and eat food and have a house, or we reject it. If we reject it, then we don't receive money from them. So we have a small window of opportunity at the moment to stop this happening. I'm not sure we will. There's just too many people who are going along with the plan, who think that stakeholder capitalism is a great idea because it benefits all people and planet.
I mean, having a job and going to work and socialising and earning some money and spending it where you want, they're all kind of quite normal things of life. It feels almost like this is an anti-human plan.
It is an anti-human plan. We used to have some value in the third industrial revolution. That was the invention of the internet and before, etc., because labour was important. In the fourth industrial revolution, labour isn't as important. They've got machines that would take care of a lot of the work. And in fact, the more people there are on the planet, the more people there are to feed and to house and to give money to and to have to look after.
As mentioned when you gave your background, you come from the kind of highest pedigree in terms of our UK media. You've worked for some of the real flagships. And what are your thoughts on the media and its role in all of this? Has it helped? Has it hindered?
It's been captured. The whole media industry or mainstream media industry has been captured. But what's interesting at the moment is that there has been an enormous amount of pushback. And while they did start to censor people and still are on social media platforms, for example, their plan become exposed quite early on. And it's a fine balance for them. They can't be seen to be censoring too many people. It would then become obvious to everyone that they're behaving like an authoritarian regime. So they have to do it gradually, step by step, incrementally, and they're doing it by adding policies to say that these conspiracy theories are dangerous, and we need this Digital Safety Act that's been rolled out in the UK, and other policies that stop this harm being, conveyed online, so these harmful conspiracy theories. But we've got this independent media, which is growing. People like Russell Brand and there's some big influencers now who are aware of this transition that's happening, not specifically to stakeholder capitalism, but they are aware that that they are trying to remove our freedoms, and there is a rise in authority, and there's a lot of people talking about it that have got huge networks. Joe Rogan in the US has the largest audience in the world. You've got Jordan Peterson and huge names with huge audiences, and that's to our advantage. So while the stakeholders have captured mainstream media, I think we have control of the independent media, and that is working to our advantage. So it would be interesting to see how that plays out, and I think if we all became a lot more strategic, and part of my mission is to create more awareness about stakeholder capitalism being the root cause of all of this from 2020 to 2030. If everyone started to recognise precisely what's going on and conveying the same message, that will help a lot more people realise what's going on. And ultimately this is a war on information, and more people who realise what's going on, the better chance we have at stopping this mayhem.
Where can people watch your film, and what can concerned people do?
So the film is available for free. I've built a platform called yellow.forum. Just type yellow.forum in the URL. I'm working with a great team to make sure that it can't be taken down in any way, and it can be watched there. And we, as part of the platform, we are creating initiatives that people can join, people can create, people can help fund. And the two main initiatives that the film highlights is to essentially take back control of local councils. People who are indoctrinated by the stakeholder capitalism idea is they're not essentially able to protect our freedoms, and then help create more awareness among people and journalists in the media. And then, of course, there's lots of additional initiatives, and this platform that we're creating is a forum that enables these initiatives to be created and for people to join and take part. And then we also have other projects. Because I've worked for the last 16 months, I haven't had an income whilst making this film. I found it very difficult financially. So in order for me to make the second part of the film and to fund other journalists, etc., we're creating a model where 100% of donations can go to specific projects, to people that are doing great work, other journalists. So this is a non-profit organisation we've set up that enables everyone to get involved, to support journalists or other people that are working on projects, to help them continue their work. And together we can all come together and help address this problem.
Richard Jess, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.